Cian Minister, I have three specific questions that I want to put to you relating to people who are experiencing homelessness. My first question is about safeguarding procedures. Recently, it was reported that an Garda Síochána had detailed knowledge of credible allegations of sexual assault against vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. Despite having detailed knowledge of these credible allegations since May, an Garda Síochána failed to pass this information on to Inner City Helping Homelessness in a timely manner where the alleged perpetrator worked, placing vulnerable people at continued risk. Where there are credible allegations, actions must be taken to protect people who are vulnerable. In other jurisdictions, the police inform relevant organisations of allegations if they are deemed credible, so that measures can be taken to protect people who are at risk. So my first question, Minister, is will the government introduce legislation to require on Garda Síochána, when they have knowledge of credible allegations of sexual assault, to pass this information on to relevant organisations where alleged perpetrators are working or are volunteering? Secondly, Minister, the latest figures show that the number of children and families living in emergency accommodation is increasing. 2 children are becoming homeless every day. There are more than 8,000 people living in emergency accommodation. Focus Ireland have called for the introduction of annual targets for reducing homelessness. They issued this call yesterday when they reported that they had helped a record number of people at risk of entering homelessness last year. We know from the National Development Plan that the government doesn't like targets, budgets or deadlines, but can you tell us that you will listen to Focus Ireland on this? So my second question is, will you introduce annual targets for reducing homelessness, and when will you publish these? My final question, Minister, is about standards in emergency accommodation, which is funded by the state but run by private for-profit companies. It is completely unacceptable that in emergency accommodation, which is publicly funded but run to make a profit, that there are no checks to ensure that staff are properly Garda vetted, trained, and that proper safeguarding procedures are in place. There have been allegations of bullying, dehumanising rules, and a lack of Garda vetting of staff in some of these hostels. As you are aware, Minister, there is currently a dual process in place whereby accommodation run by not-for-profit organisations are inspected to ensure compliance with national quality standards, and at the same time emergency accommodation run by companies and individuals for profits are not inspected to meet these standards. So my final question, Minister, is will the government apply the same standards, the national quality standards, to all providers of services for people who are experiencing homelessness, and will you end the practice of lower and sub-minimum standards for private operators?
Good Deputy O'Callaghan for your questions. And look, recent controversies with a particular homeless charity in Dublin have clearly highlighted the importance of protecting vulnerable homeless people, and we've got to keep that to the forefront of everything that we do. I have previously raised concerns about the number of ad hoc groups of people who feel that they may be doing good but are not properly trained in this sector as well. And there were that particular charity that you mentioned as well, and I know an Garda investigation is still ongoing. Very serious allegations of what happened, sexual abuse of vulnerable people, and it's got to be aboard. And we have to make sure that any standards, particularly around vetting, around Garda vetting, and that are actually in place for all charities. So the body concerned that you've mentioned operated outside of the scope of the main homeless services, as you'll know, and outside of those homeless services which are provided by local authorities and voluntary NGOs. And I think I chaired the homeless task force myself in my own department with the main homeless NGOs, those who are fully accredited, who have full charitable status, and who are very careful and considered to make sure that their staff go through the proper training and are properly vetted as well. So where there are gaps there, that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed very seriously. Issues have also been raised around the role of the charities regulator. Let's be frank about that also. There are charities that in this space that crop up nearly overnight, and that they are given charitable status but may not have qualified people working in the sector, and that's something that concerns me. I saw it myself when I've been on outreach here in this city with other groups around this city who feel that they are doing good but in many instances are not properly trained to provide the outreach that that other services provide for them. And most importantly, we want to make sure that people, one, are given a permanent home to live in, but two, that where they need emergency accommodation, that emergency accommodation is safe and has the wraparound support that we need. I've seen Focus Ireland's call for annual targets. I, on behalf of this government, as you'll know, Deputy, have committed under the Lisbon Declaration to eradicating homelessness by 2030, which Focus Ireland and many others in this sector have actually welcomed. Now, we have seen a substantial year-on-year decrease in homelessness. Over the last 2 months, we have seen some slight increases as well, and we need to watch that. I've convened a meeting of my task force actually tomorrow. But if we look at the peak of homelessness in July 2018, for child and family homelessness, we're down about 50%. So progress is being made. And why is it being made, particularly on prevention? Because this government provided unprecedented resources, €218 million in homeless service supports last year. We have a budget next week as well, where we'll be continuing to support homeless services, but a big focus on provision of permanent homes for people. And that's what we've done in our Housing for All plan as well.
Minister, I asked you 3 specific questions. You didn't answer any of those 3 questions. So I'll put them to you again. And specifically, will the government introduce legislation to require on Garda Síochána, when they have knowledge of credible allegations of sexual assault, to pass this information on to relevant organisations where alleged perpetrators are working or volunteering? I didn't ask about Garda vetting with respect to that or anything else. Annual targets, will you introduce annual targets? It is welcome, the 2030 target, but if you don't have annual targets, how are we going to know if we're making the progress towards it? So will you introduce annual targets to reduce homelessness? And will you give a commitment that the national quality standards will be applied to all providers of emergency accommodation, and that that private profit providers will no longer be exempted? So I would be grateful if you could actually answer those 3 questions.
Well, in relation to targets, Cian or Deputy O'Callaghan, firstly, I'll assess what Focus Ireland are looking for. We've made a very significant step forward in relation to committing to eradicating homelessness by 2030. That is significant, and I think in fairness you recognise that. In relation to PEAs, private emergency accommodation, I'm bringing forward new standards in the coming weeks. They've operated under a type of parallel standards with the NSQs. New standards will be brought forward as well. And I would say, by the way, and I think you should recognise this also, that the wraparound services and supports within the PEAs has greatly improved over the last 12 months. And I know you've been told that directly in your interaction with those services too, so I think that needs to be acknowledged. In relation to Garda vetting of people who operate in emergency services, and particularly around what Garda Síochána do themselves with complaints that they receive, I'm not going to stretch into what Garda Síochána do as Housing Minister. What I would say, though, is that we need to look very seriously at what happened in the recent controversies with that individual in ICHH and learn lessons from that, and actually listen to people at the time and what they were saying at the time. I think that applies to all parties as well, and all housing spokespeople also. So we'll be bringing forward those revised standards actually very shortly, I intend, in this session. I know, to be fair, you have an interest in that too, and we'll get to discuss them at the JOC and in here.